Hi there, Social 20-1, source number two in our look at interwar foreign policy. I'll give you a few seconds to examine the image, then we'll talk about it. Okay, source number two is actually a piece of what is known as propaganda. We've talked about propaganda a couple of times now. Propaganda is a one-sided, usually government message. The intent is if I give you enough propaganda, I will have indoctrinated you. I will get you to think what I want you to think. So propaganda is a tool of governments, especially I would think as expansionist governments like Japan in the 1930s. And so this piece of propaganda would be intended to get Japanese citizens to rally to the call of Japan and its expansionist policies of the 1930s, probably alluding to a coming war that probably is going to be inevitable by the 1940s. So, in examining the piece of propaganda, it's not what we would call a political cartoon. That's not the intent. It's not going to be satirical. What you see is what you get. That is the intent of this kind of an image. There's no, um, touch of irony. There's nothing you really need to figure out. Probably you're looking at the image and wondering, well, I don't read Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. How can I understand what's going on? You don't really need to. You don't really need to. There's enough visually in front of you that you could probably figure out the message behind this piece of propaganda. So let's dissect it now. Um, so image of a Japanese soldier riding in a tank. And if you look off to the background, there's another tank. One can imagine there's even more tanks beyond the two that you see on the image itself. The tanks, from what I see, they appear to be firing. So it's showing you that Japan is on the move. Japan is mobile. Japan is the aggressor, according to this image. The tanks are firing. You can see the main turret cannon is firing. The machine gun is firing, as with this tank too. And if you look closely too at the bottom, you can see the tank is running over a barbed wire fence. So that demonstrates to me that the Japanese military is in motion. It's the aggressor. It is going through someone else's defenses. And that would make me wonder, well, whose defenses could that be? So it makes me think of the notes we actually took and studied last week on Japan's interwar foreign policy. As we learn, Japan was very expansionist, um, ethnocentric as well. In the pursuit of resources and expansionist policies, Japan was going to expand into the Pacific, and we established that last week. They called this expansionist policy the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which basically meant they were going to liberate European colonies in the South Pacific and keep them for themselves. The Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The co-prosperity thing was a little ironic. This expansionist policy will really only benefit Japan. There's a map showing you the degree of Japanese expansionism by 1942. Um, so Korea, China, the Philippines, and so on. And so if we go back to that source, we can assume that the barbed wire fence might belong to China, might belong to Korea. And you wouldn't list all of those possibilities, but maybe two or three. And you would say them in such a way that, this is not for certain. But it's likely, the fence represents the defense mechanism of China, of Korea, and maybe a couple of others. And that's as far as you would take that. Um, I don't know what else you would pick apart on the cartoon. We know it's Japan because of the flag, and you would point that out for sure. And then you might speculate a bit as to what is being said linguistically on the piece of propaganda. It might say something to the effect of onwards and upwards, it's Japan's duty to conquer, living space for Japan. And you would word this in such a way that you're not saying this for sure, you're thinking, you're speculating, and that's how you would phrase that. In terms of our links to the course, well, for sure I see ethnocentrism. Japan thinking it is their duty, their calling to control and conquer Southeast Asia is for sure ethnocentric in nature. Um, if you know enough about it, you could talk about what happened in Nanking, but you might leave that for now. I would for sure mention indoctrination because anytime you see propaganda, you're going to be talking about indoctrination too. That is the result of propaganda. For sure, you're seeing a foreign policy in action, um, and in this case, an expansionist foreign policy. And absolutely, this is an example of ultranationalism because Japan is imposing its ideology, its will on some other country. And you're going to want to talk about that. Finally, in terms of perspective, well, being propaganda, it's usually very, I don't want to use the word honest. I can't think of a better word. But what you see is what you get on that piece of propaganda. So this person, the government that designed this propaganda, is giving a full-on embracement of nationalism, even a full-on embracement of ultranationalism. There's no challenge to nationalism. There's no critique. There's no, you know, hypocritical thinking behind that image. That they're trying to show you full-blown ultranationalism and what it means for Japan, and that's pretty much all there is to it for that cartoon. You'll see propaganda periodically in 20-1. You'll see it a lot in 30-1. On occasion, on the 30-1 diploma has asked kids to interpret a piece of propaganda as part of the source analysis. So that gives you a better idea of how to do that. Good job.